Okay, class, and welcome back to videos for Operations Business 3010. And I'm going to take us through a complete base case, give you an idea why we use this. We've done one for homework. We've seen one out of the chapter, the Jacobs book. It's around page 59 at the present moment, depending on what version of the book we have. It's chapter 3, and we talk about base case because it's when we're going to project a project just using rough numbers and rough phases of a project. So I'm starting here with a blank Excel, and I will put some time markers in the comments after I post this about how to get past some of the preliminary information and get to some of the later information that's pretty important to understand how we would say even finance something like this when we would go beyond what we have as far as our friends and family to contribute into or invest into our company, what we have out of pocket if we have to go outside for outside investing. So let's say I need a laptop case for my 17-inch Lenovo P71, which is a 17.3 display. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out and say, look, let's build these. I'm going to start making these things as a business. So what's a great place to go? Let's run over to Etsy. Okay, so we're going to run over to Etsy. And what I did here was I ran a search on Etsy for a 17-inch laptop case. And we get all these different ones coming back at us. So let's start a company, and instead of like dealing with, I think it would be a little bit troublesome to deal with natural products like leather and such. And some of these fancy types are really nice and everything. But let's go for something really simple like a Cordura or some other kind of foamy type simple sleeve. And we're going to make these, okay? And if you take a quick look around, we see that here's ones for almost $53 and here's one for about $48. So let's say that they're going to retail at about $50. That means we need to be able to get these to the retailers for about half that. Retailers will double pretty much what they pay for something, at least when they first put it out on the shelves before they start discounting it, right? So we're going to be selling this out to the retailers for $25. Let's keep that in mind because we want to have a price, our wholesale price for this. And usually, if everything works out right, we're able to sell this for twice what the all-up cost would be per unit that it would cost us to actually produce this. So what's half of 25 but 12.50, okay? So that's generally how the waterfall works. You can always, if you want to know how much you need to put it out on the shelf to retails, it doubles a couple times from the time you make it, you know, the costs involved, all rolled in there with labor and all the other costs. You pretty much double whatever that number is out as wholesale price. And then when the retailers pick it up, they double it again. That's a real rough rule of thumb of business when you're dealing with tangible items like this. So we just got our root numbers here. We're doing a real quick base case here, and we just want to see if we're even in the ballpark of making money. So I have a blank sheet here, and we're going to name it a 17-inch laptop sleeve. Okay, that's what they kind of call these things. Okay, that's the name of what we're going to do here. And actually, we'll put in here, this is the base case. We're going to do the base case for this. All right, so it's like roughing out the numbers. And I'm going to go over to the book, and we look at the book example. I have a video for this that I've posted as well that works through, actually does the details here for this example. The current rev of the book is, I think, Rev 15, and it's on page 59. I think my video refers to an earlier version, and it's just a couple pages off from that, but it's in that area of chapter 3. Okay. By taking a look at this, we take a look at what the phases of the project are. What should we take a look at as far as how to project this out? Let's go by quarters like this example does over, okay, well, let's say 4 years. Okay, we're just going to use similar numbers to what we have in here, but maybe they apply to this real product. The reason I'm using this like real product concept is I'm seeing such a short link from the theory that we see here in the book. We see the spreadsheet and this theoretical product to exactly what you would do is if you have a product idea, just start with rough numbers, put them in there, and then start refining them. Okay. So what we have are really 5, but it's listed as 4 phases here. They overlap production and sales. For simplicity, the general idea when we're doing these base cases for the course is that you sell everything you produce and you start producing and selling at the very same time. And that's a little bit of a simplistic approach to that because you'd have to build up some inventory before you start really publicizing this thing and selling it. Okay, but that's why it's called a base case. It's later on you'll add your detail. Okay, so we have devel, ramp up, marketing and support, and production and sales. So we're going to come over here and we'll put in devel, ramp up, marketing and support. Okay, that's what happens before you start softening the market. You start publicizing it before it's on the shelf. And then for at least the projection here, the drawing of our calendar, they wrap these two things together. So we have production and sales. They put them together. We're going to separate them out in a minute here. Okay, we're going to have to do that. Okay. So I'm going to insert a line, a little bit of Excel here. I'm going to insert a line, and once it inserts, before I touch anything else, I'm going to do Control Y. I'm going to give myself a few areas up here, because what we said is if we have to look back at what kind of information we need to put in here, we put our production cost at $12.50. That's in dollars, not time. Right? And our price, and this is per unit, of course. And our price is $25 to the streets, as we say. Okay. Okay, and our production quantity is going to equal our sales quantity. Production quantity. Okay, let's say we're going to make 1,000 of these. I'm doing this totally as if I'm really making these. I haven't looked into the numbers yet, but let's say we're going to produce, let's say 10,000 per year. Okay, that's per year. And we're going to work out our problem here as quarters. So the production quantity, if we need anything else, I'm going to use these lines later on. Okay, so now we need to draw our schedule, our calendar. And what we do is we draw that in red. Okay, we use Excel. We kind of like paint here to be able to show our rollout, our schedule. It helps us discuss this with other people. We can print this out. We discuss, gee, boss, this is a great thing that I've come up with, but here's the right rough numbers. Should we pursue this? And he'll tell us, or she'll tell us either to go ahead with it and continue detailing it or not, depending on what the condition or the situation of the company is in. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab 4 cells here, merge and center, and name that year 1. Okay, and I'm going to do this 3 more times. I'm just going to say merge and center, merge and center, and merge and center. Okay, if you notice, it's blowing away the separator lines there. I'm going to do type year 2 here. I'm doing this in a certain order so that I can grab these two and just drag it over and let it figure it out. Look at that. There's year 3 and 4, right? And so now we need quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. 4 quarters, right? And I'm going to take them, I am going to center them, and I'm going to Control C them and copy them over 3 more times. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3. So this can show you how fast you can start moving along in Excel. And let's just use the same rollout times as this example from the book is. I'm going to modify it just a little bit. I'm going to just drag it one quarter difference, so we're not exactly copying that, to give you a little bit of an idea. All right, so what we're going to say is development. Okay, let's paint it first, and then let's make our adjustment. Okay, so it says 4 quarters. All right, so it's 4 quarters for here. We're going to paint that red. We take the bucket and we throw some red in there. The ramp up from our example was 2 quarters, starting right here. Okay. And then delayed by 1 more month is our marketing and support starts I just said month, but I meant to say quarter, but starts 1 quarter earlier than the production and sales does. So we fill it, and finally, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm correct here, we start in Q2 of year 2 in the example in the book. Okay. Right. So I'm going to grab these and paint them red. Okay. And, after we have some discussions, what ends up happening is we said, the development this is not a very complicated product. Okay. So we're going to move all of our start times in by a month. I'm just showing what normally happens here. Okay. We started with a rough case and we're going to a little bit more refinement and say, we're going to pull this in a little bit. So what we're going to do is, I'll show you a little cheat here, we're going to say it's only going to take 3 quarters to get the development done. It's really not a very complicated product here, right? And so that means we could just move everything in by a quarter. And if you notice what I'm doing, I'm just copying these cells over. Okay, see how I'm moving them over to the left by a quarter? Okay, And so I can grab here. I'm just using the ability in Excel to copy these in. If you looked at what we did is we just shifted everything over by 1/4 versus what we had from the example. This is very much what happens. You start from someone else's work sometimes, you take a look at what happened in another project, and you give yourself a reason why it's a little bit different. So everything else is the same, but it only takes us 1/4 less to develop this pretty straightforward foamy kind of product that goes around a laptop with a zipper on it. That's basically all it is. Okay. Now, the reason we do this is to be able to communicate to ourselves and to the other people. And then it's also for error checking. Okay, we can use this for error checking. So if you look at what happens is, here's our phases. We have them listed as 4, but remember, production and sales, for the purposes of discussion here, they're directly overlapped, and everything you produce, you sell. That's a simplification of it. And then later when we analyze it, we're going to have to take a look. As you see down here, we ended up having to do some calculations. So let's go through the typical calculations here. We start by just grabbing the same phases again. And for each of the phases, we can start putting in the costs associated and the revenues associated for the period. So we have periods, Q1 through 4, over 4 years. And so we have a total of 16 quarters that we're going to be working on. And before I get started, I'm going to, if you look at what happens here, I'm going to separate this out. This is what we're going to need to do. All right. So we're going to end up having to calculate some things for production. We're separating out the production and sales. So I'm going to insert a line. I think I need another one there, and probably even another. I'm going to put 2 extra lines in there. I believe we need 3 lines between there to do what we need to do. Okay, so for development, let's say our development costs. So we're just producing this. Our development costs is let's call it $250,000. $250,000, and that's over 3 quarters. It's going to take us those 3 quarters. The 250,000 is spread over that. Okay, and ramp up is going to cost us $125,000 over 2 quarters. We have to know how far to spread this out. Okay, and marketing and support. Once it starts, we're going to be paying in $75,000 a quarter, $75,000 a year. Okay. And finally, then that's when we have to start calculating production and sales types of things here. Okay. Right. That gives us enough information to get going. And this is for 4 quarters, as in a year. 4 quarters. Control Z. Undo is Control Z. And I'm going to retype this as 4 quarters or a year. That's what we're talking about. Okay. All right, there we go. And we might have to do some formatting as we go along. Okay, we have costs here. We're going to change, right now we're going to format those to be accounting. I like the accounting format here. So we just clicked accounting. And because these are smaller numbers of dollars, or smaller in the world of accounting and finance, we're going to leave the decimal places in there to show them. But when we show these costs, we're going to go to accounting. I'm formatting that. I'm doing a quick format by clicking that, and we can drop the zeros. So I use this other control up here to adjust how many zeros. I don't want the pennies involved here. These are large numbers. Okay. Okay. So now we need to spread need to spread 250,000 over 3 quarters. So for these 3 red cells, we're going to drop down numbers in below here. We're using the red as a guide, and that's going to be equal to 250,000. I'm going to use my F4 to make an absolute reference in here, so I can drag this cell later. And we're going to divide by 3. This is going to happen over 3 quarters. All right. So now I can drag this to match up with our red up above. And as you can see, we get these little pound symbols here. That just means that the columns are a little too narrow to be able to show it. And while we're doing this, we're going to grab these initial cells here, and we're going to format them without the zeros, without the decimals rather. Okay. If you notice when I dragged it, it still used the decimals. Okay. So we just reset the format on these. The ramp up, when does that start? The ramp up starts over here. So we have to go to that cell, and that's going to equal the ramp up F4 to make it absolute referenced, divide by 2. Okay, so the ramp up is spread over 2 quarters. So to match our kind of our guide up here, drag that over, and then as we get over to marketing and support, that is going to now run out to the end of the 4th year. And what? Every quarter that is going to be, it's going to be $75,000. It's going to be this number, make it an absolute reference, F4, divided by 4. Okay, because that's per year. All right, and then we can run that out. Now production is going to be a cost, so we're going to put in here quantity QTY, and I'm going to format that by right justifying it. That's sort of like an indent underneath production. Okay, the quantity, and we're going to put the unit cost here. Same thing. And so we're going to say the period production cost. That's going to be how many we made times the unit cost there, all right? And I just want to rate justify that. Okay, so I rate justified these 3 things. So we start production here. That's why we have the red. We're showing production and sales starts in Q1. So we need to put our numbers in here. So this is going to be equal to the quantity. The production quantity is also going to be the sales quantity. And that is, what do we say, 10,000 per year. So it's going to be equal to that number. And we want to lock it down with an F4 divided by 4. Okay, so that's a quantity. It doesn't have a dollars. The units are just fine on that. Format's just great on that. Okay, so that's every quarter we produce 2,500, which does make sense. I'm just going to go back up here and just notate it that was for a year production, 4 quarters. All right. So now, just as we're looking up here as the red, everywhere this red is, we need to drag this across. That's what the red is for. That helps us as we're building it, but it also helps communicate it to people later on. This is the rough schedule, and these are the numbers associated with it. Okay, so the unit cost here is going to be equal to 1250. So equals 1250. I need to lock that down with an F4, make it an absolute reference, and it is what it is. We don't have to multiply yet, do anything with that. We just drag that across. For every quarter, we're showing a simplified version where the cost does not change. In real life, this number might go down because you found cheaper suppliers and you might find quicker ways of doing things. All right. Quite often the cost goes down. If it's not, the unit itself doesn't really change. You get economies of scale and such. So the period production cost is going to be equal to the quantity times the unit cost, right? And there we get that. I want to format that cell as it already is accounting, and I got rid of the pennies. Okay, we're dealing with a fairly large number here. I don't want to see the pennies involved. Okay, and then we run that straight out. Okay, now we do the same thing for sales. What I'm going to do is just give myself a separator row in here just for visual reasons. I'm going to insert that, and I just give myself a separator row. And the sales are kind of, we're going to have to kind of do the same thing or similar things to it as in production. Quantity, I'm just going to repeat here. Now we don't have to. I can use later on. I can use this line, this quantity, to I can reference it down here as we're doing the total sales for any period. But I'm going to reproduce it, or just it's redundant. Okay, so I'm going to grab this. I could just do a Control-C for the quantity. Now remember, our sales is going to exactly match our production in time and quantity and everything else. So I just drop this down here. Because we used absolute referencing, it worked. Okay, that's one of the reasons why I used absolute referencing on that. I could just drop it in. All right, and okay. Unit cost is equal to whatever we put in here up here, 25. Make that absolute with my F4, hit enter. Okay, so you should see by now, we should be making about 1250. We'll clear about 1250 on each unit, right? Okay, and so instead of the unit cost, we're going to put unit price in here. We're going to fix that. And we're going to say period production sales. Get rid of the production word. I'll put a $sign in front of the sales because we're calculating how much in dollars. Okay, so that's going to be equal to the quantity times the price we charge. So we will continue by pulling our period sales over here through the rest of the years. And to be able to see, we get these pound signs here says that the columns are too narrow, so we can grab all of them at once and double click on the border and it spreads them out. I'm going to grab them again, reformat that. It's already formatted as accounting. We're going to get rid of the pennies. Okay, get rid of the decimal places there. Okay, and now we're ready to do our period summations. I'm going to put a double border underneath here. Usually indicates you're about to do something like do a summation. So we had a bottom double border there. So these are going to be the period cash flows. All right, now what do we need to do? Here's our sales. The very last line here before our double bottom margin or border is what we take in every month. And we're going to write a general equation. We're going to be able to write it into the period cash flows and drag it across. And so the only revenues shown are these last lines. And then we have to subtract all the expenses from above. So we're going to write in here an equation where it's going to start with the sales, and then we're going to subtract the sum of all the outflow, all the expenses that we have. And that would be our development costs, and I'm holding down the control key. That would be any ramp-up costs, any marketing and support, and any production costs. Okay, so that takes, there's four, in this example, we have 4 areas of expenses at all. So we wrote this in a really nice generic Excel framework here. I hit enter and a little bit of a problem here. C30 minus, oh, I'm sorry. Let's do the sum of that, okay? And it comes out with the parentheses indicate that it's a negative number, and we're going to drag this across to the right. So this shows us the period cash flows. Now, I'm going to leave it up to you to take a look at the other videos. I'm not going to get into it too deeply here. I'm just going to show the period discount cash flows. Okay, I'm just going to type this number in. For each period we take, it's going to be equal to the cash flows from that period divided by, give myself a couple parens here, and it's going to be 1 plus the discount rate, which we haven't written in there yet. And so what I'll do is I will put it in right here. Okay, I'm going to put the number in right at this cell. In the future, I'm going to go back and fill that in because we didn't put in what our discount rate is for this problem. Okay, and it's an annual rate, so we're going to divide it by 4. Okay, now I want to put that little term there into parentheses so it gets executed correctly. So if you look at that, I take my rate divided by 4. I want to make sure that the order of operations is correct, and I use parentheses to lock that down. And the other thing I'm going to do is lock down the discount rate there with an F4. It makes it an absolute reference. Okay. And then the last thing we're going to do is raise it to the period. Okay. This is where I'm going to have a little bit of work to do. What I'll do is I'm going to raise it to what period we're in. So I'm going to use this area here to put in the periods. Okay, follow me when I get there, you'll understand it. I'm going to use another set of parens here around my denominator to make sure that all of the operations are executed correctly in the correct order. I hit enter, and I'm going to change the format on that to drop down get rid of the pennies there, okay? And period discount, okay. So our discount rate is, it picked up as a 0. I'm going to first of all put in, here's our discount rate. There's 2 things I have to write in afterwards. Discount rate, we haven't set that yet. And I'm going to say, let's make this 10% annual. Okay, I hit enter. Okay, we'll still see no difference here. And this is where we're going to put in a period. It's like the count. Okay, so this is the first period. This is the second period. All right, and I'm going to drag that. Oops, let me do that again. I have to select that correctly. So Control C. Okay, so I have to select these two cells correctly. Grab the little handle down here, drag it across, and we should have 16. It should go 1 through 16. And if you notice, now that I fed the correct numbers, okay, so if I fed the correct discount rate and what period we're in, we actually got a discounted number. It's less than 83,000. It gets discounted to 81,000 because we're evaluating this after 90 days, okay, every quarter, all right? The only thing I need to do is on the discount rate, we're going to make it a percentage. And I'll actually show a couple decimal places on there, okay? So as a matter of fact, okay, very good. So now we have a generic formula here we can drag to the right. Do we have everything locked down that we need? Yes, everything's locked down that we needed in as far as absolute terms go. Okay. And then this is the part of the problem here that is probably not covered in the other videos. Okay, so I'll put a marker at this place to indicate if you already understand everything I've done up to this point. I'm going to put a marker in this video, in the notes of the video, to indicate this is where basically I'm treating new information. Okay, so we want to do the cumulative. Okay, we want to write in a line here. It's kind of like our bank account. We want to show from these cash flows you can think of it as what we're turning into our bank account or our treasury. Okay, so the first period, there's no previous activity. So we're going to say the cumulative of the first quarter is just going to be the net from that quarter. This is the hard cold dollars that come in. And it's an outflow of 83,333. Okay. Okay, so we're out 83,000 in the first period. Okay, now we have to pump in this equation where we say the current, let's call it, if you want to think of it about it as your bank account, all right, is equal to the previous bank account plus this period's cash flow. All right, so for every period, I can drag this across. For every period, we're just adding the previous cumulative to the current period's outflow or inflow. Okay, so I can drag this across, okay? Okay. All right, so if you notice something here, our numbers are all negative. I produced all these numbers as I went along here just to indicate to you, what happens when you take a look at a company and you want to understand some rough profitability. Well, this isn't profitable, right? So we can see that we never come out into the black after 4 years. Okay, so what would we change here? Okay, what kind of things would change here? One of the things we could do is increase the number of things that we produce and sell. Okay, so let's see what happens if we come up with if we increase things from 10,000 production of 10,000 a year. Let's look at what number of units we'd have to produce to actually be positive after the second year. So we're going to look at the number right here for the first quarter of year 3. This is called sensitivity analysis, right? So let's throw a number in here, 100,000. If we did 100,000 of these, do we ever make any money? Well, yes. All right. So we actually saw, I'm not going to go any further into it, but this is a very good example of sensitivity analysis. We better be speaking about 100,000 of these laptop cases per year for us to be profitable. Okay. And even then, for all the work after 4 years, we've only made $3 million. This is almost a cottage industry kind of level of, solopreneur making these or whatever. Okay. It's not going to be demanding 35 employees or 350 employees or 3,500 employees. You have to be able to make money at doing this. And it says in, what did we say? Like the beginning of year 3, we've netted by then $1 million. It says that every quarter we're bringing in about 300,000. So in other words, we're bringing in about 100,000 every quarter. So you'd have to be watching all your expenses, which we haven't pumped into here yet. We haven't really shown all the overhead costs and other things that come along with this, to be making about $100,000 a year. Okay, so that's how we did that. Okay, so that I'm gonna turn that one green. I want to just show that these are the things that are a little bit fresh compared to the other videos that I had produced. So this is the cumulative. Okay, so what we've looked at is when you look at what your bank account is, we look at the deepest number. How far negative, how low do we ever go? Well, if you look at this month, we can see, we could plot this also, but I'm not going to do that in this video, okay? We could plot this against what period we're in, and it would show that the deepest that we ever get is 393,000. That's our bank account. Now, remember, I was adding, all along here, I was adding the numbers here through our period cash flows, okay? And so what we want to be able to do is say, we need to be able to take a loan on this. All right, so we're going to take a loan. So the loan amount I'll put here, and that I am going to left justify this, bring that back over. As a matter of fact, I'm going to bring all of these row headers over to the left. I'm just formatting over to the left. The loan amount in this cell is going to be equal to, find where your bank account is the deepest. We're going to have to borrow that amount of money. Okay, so we're going to say, boom. All right, so we said we have to borrow $393,000. Okay, now what are our payments? What's our payment on that? Okay, so we'll turn that green. This is the loan amount. And so what's our period payment? If we have to pay this every 3 months in a quarter, okay, so we're going to do the payment here. We're going to run the payment formula that wants to know what's our rate. Okay, so we need to put in 10% over 4. Okay, so this is the interest rate we're going to be paying on this thing, right? So the payment is going to be C10 over 4. And I put a comma in there. The next thing it needs is the number of periods is equal to 16. All right, so I'm just going to hard code that in there as 16. And the present value is this amount up here. And if you look at the hint that it's giving us, the other two terms here are conditional, and I'll tell you that in this case we don't need them. So I close that off with a parentheses. I hit enter. It says every 3 months we're paying $30,160. Okay, so what's our total loan at the end? What's this total when we're all done paying this? What it's going to be? It's going to be equal to, very simple number here. It's going to be 16 payments at 16 quarters times what the payment was each of these periods, right? So on $393,000 borrowed, we're going to be paying back a total over 4 years of $482. So it's almost $100,000, roughly speaking, nearly 100. It's like $90,000 we're paying on a $400,000 loan, and I'm roughing those numbers out. Okay. Now what's really interesting here is the point that we've talked about, the law of 78s. You would think that for every payment that we're paying back to the lender, we would be paying, if you look at the component of interest and the component of the principal that we're paying back, as we discussed in class, we would think that that ratio is just constant. But no, the way lending works is that it uses the law of 78s. I'm going to calculate it first here, and then I'll get into an explanation. All right. And so what we want to do is we want to take a look at, for every period, we want to look at how much interest and how much principal we're paying. So first we'll show the principal payment is another formula here. It wants to know the rate. So we have to say it is equal to, I have to roll up a little bit, but off the screen. Okay, so it's going to be equal to 10 over 4. Okay. And in this case, we do want to lock down this as an absolute reference. We put the dollars in there. Okay. We come back to continue editing. It wants to know what period we're in. Okay, so first of all, I have to do PMT. There we go. I had lost that. Okay, so it wants to know what period we're in. So this is the period, comma. The number of periods is 16, and the present value is going to be our 393. Okay, here we go. Now, so we have the principal of every payment. So remember, this is our payment up here. Our total payment is 30,000, but about 10,000 of it is interest per payment. And the way that we can find that out is first we figured out what part of it is principal, and then we're looking at what part of it is going to be interest. And I'm going to be a little bit lazy here. I'm going to drag the P payment down one cell here, and a few things are going to go a little bit out of alignment. Instead of the principal payment, we want the interest payment, and I need to point back at what period we're in, which was C18. It had auto incremented when I dragged the formula down. Let's see if I got that correct. C18, I payment. And what is the problem here? I payment, C18, 16, and B36. Okay. So this had auto incremented as well. So I'm going to make that B35. And then if we do an alt equals is the shortcut to do the sum of these two numbers, it is equal to 30,160. Just as we had said, every payment is going to be that much. And the point of the law of 78 is the lender gets most of the interest back up first. It's weighted heavily toward the interest payback. Okay. All right. So now we can grab all three of these numbers. I'm just going to reformat it by dropping the pennies off there. It's a big number. We don't want them. Okay. And I'm going to drag them out. Here we go. Okay, something auto incremented that shouldn't have. Yes, so it should be B35. B35 is this. This definitely needs to be locked down as an absolute reference. That got auto incremented. Need to do it here. So it doesn't auto increment when I drag it across, and that cell is fine. Okay, so now we'll drag all three of these across again. If I can grab it, and we drag it across. All right, so you notice that the payments, okay, so the payment, this is the same thing that we've had up top. There's the payment. And we're just doing an error check with this summation here. The point of the 78s is that you're paying back the least amount of principal up front. Notice how the principal payments go up by about $500 every period. So the first time you make a payment, you're really buying $20,000 worth of the 400 that you borrowed. Okay, and with each payment, each period's payment, the amount of principal that you're paying back goes up. And this is so it slants toward the house or slants toward the lender, so that if you notice, the interest payments correspond in a inverse pattern here, where they start out very high and they drop by about $500. Okay, so after a lender and a borrower figure out how much it is that you're going to borrow, and then they figure out with whatever interest it is what the total amount is going to be, the next step is to readjust. It's going to be, I'll write in there, I payment and P payment. So we keep that straight, okay? All right, and this is just a check. So this payment here is just a check, if you follow what I'm doing here, all right? I'm just making sure that these two numbers added together, and remember underlying this is an Excel formula here, that when we add these two up, that you're paying a constant 30,161 every period. Okay. Now the way that this works, and the way that we describe it, is we use the law of 78s. Okay, the law of 78, and where that came from, I'm going to remind us is I'm going to work it out here. The law of 78 is described. What we use is a 1 year term for a loan. Okay, so we talk about it as a 1 year loan. You notice that we're doing something different up here. We had 4 years divided by quarters, but to understand the law of 78, we take months 1 through 12. Okay, so this is the explanation part of everything going on. We take 1 through 12. Okay, so if we do the sum of these numbers, we get 78. Okay. So this is 1 plus 2 plus 3, all the way through to 12. So the base case actually of explaining the law of 78 is 1 year by months. Okay, 1 through 12 is 78ths. And the way that you pay back a 1 year loan that goes payments on every month is that the first month you pay back 1/78th of the loan, and the second month you pay 2/78ths, all the way through to the last time where you pay 12/78ths. Okay, so now if you add up 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 all the way through 12, you're going to get 78/78. So you're going to end up paying the principal all back, but at this rate. So that's the explanation of why or how, when you make payments on a loan, that the lender in general, it's all how it's written up, by the terms have to specify this out, is that they're going to follow this standard rule for lending and borrowing, and that the amount that you pay back of your principal is going to gradually go up over time. And that's the whole point of going over this part, because if you're going to run a business, you obviously have to be able to cover this amount of money. And the only thing I would say that in real life, you'd really not be asking for just that amount. You would actually be asking for, put that back in there, you'd really be asking for about 500,000 plus or minus. Okay. It all depends on the situation here. You wouldn't borrow to the dollar exactly what this shows. This is a very rough forecast. And anybody would be able to tell you that you're missing probably a number of other expenses that you'd be adding in more rows here for. And generally start coming up with some other kind of, rather than a flat sales and production level, you'd get something more realistic. And you probably wouldn't sell everything that you have. That would mean the demand would be much higher than the number that you're actually selling. Okay, so that's pretty much it. And hopefully that this was helpful, especially toward the end here. It's to show this other part about how business is really done, where you need to borrow the money, and we took the loan out and we calculated what the payments were going to be every period, and we looked at what the total loan payment payback was going to be, and then we split it down into the principal payment and the interest payment for every period, and they added up to 30,161. So very good, and all the best.